I've learned more and experienced more in the space. Yeah, I've learned that it's not just like simply this kind of romanticized, benevolent spirit, but ultimately, and how do I, right, yeah, psychedelics have changed my life, yeah, for the better. They've helped me to address traumas and process the grief I had from the death of my father. They've unlocked doors to the divine and rewired my brain. Here I am before a mushroom ceremony, receiving some hape. And yeah, it was a really, really grueling ceremony actually, but yeah, I managed to survive intact just about. And so through all of this, I've been a journalist, yeah, writing among other topics on psychedelics. This, for The Guardian, a lady who had complex anorexia and went into remission after using MDMA and ketamine. This on DMT, the mystery of DMT in the brain. For The Observer, on the magic of psychedelics transforming psychiatry. For Wired, on advanced cultivation techniques leading to stronger strengths of mushrooms. For The Daily Beast, on cops such as Neil Woods, who's here today, demanding the right for access to psychedelic therapy themselves, and for Vice on this church that fed 5-MeO substrate to shrooms while they're growing and created their own new psychedelic. And so it's been incredible to see the whole scene grow. And I've published 2 books, one, Should All Drugs Be Legalized, and another on psychedelics, which came out last month. I was also a fellow for Ferris and UC Berkeley's psychedelic journalism scheme. And the first story I wrote on psychedelics was in 2017 on people believing under the influence of LSD that they could communicate with nature. And so, yeah, that's just to preface all of this by saying that, I'm hugely, hugely sympathetic to, the power of psychedelics and, yeah, the liberation that people can get in their minds and indeed, in their external lives through all of this, as all of this shows. And yeah, as I say, incredible to see it over the last 10 years really, really, coming above the parapet, fruiting like a mushroom. But with increased access to psychedelics. Okay, so basically anyway, like the quarterback took ayahuasca, Aaron Rodgers, and he credited his 2 most valuable players, his last 2, with drinking ayahuasca, right? And then his teammates did this celebration after they scored a touchdown. So I think it just demonstrates, how, mainstream psychedelics have really become, and that's, yeah, they drink from the kind of football chalice and then fall to the floor. A bit more like DMT, really, not like ayahuasca. Yeah, but that's great. Thank you very much. And so, yeah, with that, and then now I can't really go back. There we go. Yeah, with that, the commercialization of psychedelics, it's gone a bit too far, I would say. Like, I investigated this Bufo Avarius hotel in Tulum a few years ago, and really, yeah, so they've got these kind of banners outside. That's the founder saying that you may not be perfect, but DMT can fix you. They've also got like these posters of Joe Rogan and Jim Carrey and Mike Tyson. Although, Jim Carrey and Joe Rogan, I don't think have actually smoked 5-MeO DMT. And then there was this chap down the road on the beach, selling Bufo from this ceviche truck. It was really, really, beggars belief. But anyway, so I got to observe a ceremony at the Bufo Hotel, and they call it speed toading, like where people come in off the street and, within an hour, they've met God through this molecule, and then they kind of back out on the street with zero integration. And so, yeah, I got to sit in on this ceremony, and yeah, there was this Irish couple. The girl actually completely puked on me. She just suddenly projectile because they're not given any instructions. So she didn't fast that morning, and yeah, she broke through. They gave her a massive dose, But then there was no room at the hotel for them to stay that night. So they just went off to Chichen Itza, this like Mayan ruins about an hour away. And yeah, I got her number to sort of stay in touch for the story. And yeah, she was telling me just, yeah, the severe paranoia that she was suffering and like delusions so bad that she thought that she was, never going to return to her normal self. Luckily, after a week, she did, but, even kind of, speaking to her about it, you could tell, like, it had left some sort of imprint. This is a bit rusty, this remote. Okay, so yeah, the next year, I was invited to this high-end clinic in Cancun to do, Ibogaine. And yeah, I was a little bit like, should I do this? But yeah, spoke to folks and, it seemed kind of newsworthy in a way that sort of more above ground Ibogaine clinics were opening up to try and do it in a better way, right? Like, it had long been, even the underground of the underground, the Ibogaine treatments. And so, yeah, this place was really positioning itself as a market leader. And yeah, in this intensive care ward, like they do look after you, and because Ibogaine can sort of, disrupt the heart rate, so people have gone into like cardiac arrest and, in some cases have died before, but I think it really should be avoided through screening, right? People just shouldn't give it to someone who's that fragile. But a lot of people that go to do Ibogaine, are, because it's a kind of reliable interrupter of addiction withdrawal symptoms. So people can have these, awful opioid withdrawal symptoms like nosebleeds and like twitch, like really, debilitating, and like that, they're gone. So it can be, really, really miraculous. And I wasn't dealing with any addiction, but yeah, for me, it was like a roller coaster ride of, crazy visions, really, like into the field in Gabon, where the bush, the iboga bush was growing, and clips of like my younger self. Like it kind of conjures this sort of like autobiographical movie, and I could, I was like a fly on the wall seeing visions of my younger self, like young like happy and grinning, sort of like the inner child, I guess. Then I, viewed Christ's crucifixion, and then came the mind purge, where I had this like narrative of like overwhelming, like amplified, judgmental thinking. But yeah, after that came bliss, and it was like a weight was lifted, really. But after the publication of the story, I discovered that a guy who was at the clinic at the same time as me, he arrived, I think, on my penultimate day. He ended up dying at the clinic. And so, yeah, despite the risks of Ibogaine, it raises obvious questions about safety and transparency at the centre. And there was all sorts of other drama there that I came to learn about and reported it for Rolling Stone. And just 2 hours after the Rolling Stone article got published, we gave the chap the pseudonym David because his family didn't want him to be named. The clinic published this on their Instagram, like a testimonial attributed to a man named David, saying that Beyond gave me the best opportunity for a future. Obviously, for legal reasons, I don't want to speculate, but, I do find it very difficult to believe that was a coincidence, and, raises further questions for me, really. And so anyway, when I was there at the clinic, I personally had a good experience, and I was coming down, and I was sitting in the living room, and I was reading a couple of books, speeding through books actually, on Ibogaine and Iboga, and one book was this beautiful tale about recovery from heroin and how a woman had persuaded her heroin addict husband, to go and do it, and apparently, he'd been a lifetime heroin addict. He had been, clean for a while, but he'd relapsed. And apparently he didn't do drugs or even drink coffee afterwards. And they swiftly learned how to serve it with a Gabonese medicine man, although I didn't realize until later just how quickly they'd started serving it to others. But anyway, the book really, really kind of helped my process. So I reached out to them and just said, like, thanks so much, amazing book. And it turned out they had a center in Costa Rica, and they invited me to try the holy root, they call it, which is like the full version of Ibogaine. So I thought it would add like an extra layer to the story. And yeah, I headed out there to Costa Rica. There was only one other person on the retreat, which was a bit weird. And there was like maintenance workers like working on the ceremonial space when I arrived. And yeah, it turned out it was their first retreat there, and they just moved in. And yeah, as I say, a bit of a weird vibe. The couple were bickering between each other quite a lot. But there was some lovely staff and great food, and the ceremonies were challenging, but yeah, again, I felt amazing afterwards. Really felt like a further weight was lifted. And so in the original story I showed you with me in the bed, yeah, I gave that clinic and this retreat center fairly good PR, I guess. But then towards the end of last year, I found out that a woman had died at the Iboga retreat center that I went to as well. Lauren Levis, who's shown in this picture, she also went into cardiac arrest. And yeah, so I'm just like, damn, like what? There was like deaths at both the places that I went to and gave good PR and that were presenting themselves as market leaders. So I'm asking myself, like, do I really want to like effectively, promote these places? And all sorts of nonsense happened afterwards as well. Like shamefully, they didn't tell the family, and the family had to find out from the police. I mean, that's awful, isn't it? And like all the other like participants, were in the dark as well, and just crazy stuff. But yeah, lots of people, including me, and people to a lot greater extent than me, are benefiting from Iboga and Ibogaine, right? But yeah, places are popping up, and not everywhere is as safe as it seems. And different retreat centers are using like targeted Instagram ads and celebrity endorsements. They get comped, they get free treatment, and then you put a video, endorsing it, and that like jobs are good un. And yeah, some places are even putting up billboards, like in the Americas where I've spent a lot of time. This is in Orlando, Florida. Yeah, I'm not going to catalogue just like tons of different places, but what I will say is it's pretty wild that this place, and this story was published a couple of weeks ago, was founded by a man that was convicted of pimping a few years prior, and this place turned out to be like the place for ayahuasca, like 30,000 members, apart from the Brazilian church organizations. Like this was the place to go. But yeah, a young man also died there in 2018, just as it was becoming popular in the most grisly circumstances possible. But soon enough, they were having kind of 100-person ceremonies there, and making a lot of money. And this chap, here he is in Tulum, time to get my tribal on. He was living a real jet-set lifestyle. He was hardly ever there. The church was making millions, and I visited there in October. Shortly after the church was actually forced to close because the father of the young man who died there took out legal action and actually won a sort of unprecedented $15 million ruling. And yeah, I don't know exactly what happened, but this does seem to be the ayahuasca cauldron just kind of dumped out back with the dregs in the corner. And so around this time, I've been reporting a lot on this kind of thing, especially in the last couple of years. I've started to hear claims that some like facilitators, indigenous and kind of neo-shamans, are purposefully causing spiritual harm to people in ceremonies. I really struggled to believe it, even then, I came into it very sort of naive and wet behind the ears. But the more I heard about it and the more I kind of read into the literature, the more I spoke to people, I wondered, and I learned more about how shamanism has a dualistic nature, and it really is this kind of high-stakes tango between the Diet and Lark realms. And it made me wonder, this mushroom ceremony I wrote about a couple of years ago that really went pear-shaped. I wondered, what influence did kind of metaphysical factors have there? And I spoke to ayahuasca facilitators in Peru for another project. And they were actually open in telling me that more than half of their peers are practicing brujeria, which Emily would have given us a good grounding in, but basically the dark arts. And they seem to do energetic attacks to somehow increase their own spiritual power. So yeah, this is just leaving me like, sort of like a cosmic head fuck. Because I'm a pretty rational guy. But yeah, the more you hear that, compelling accounts, they're difficult to kind of ignore. So this is a story published by Jules Evans on his blog last year, and I followed it up in some detail, and I've got a follow-up for Vice coming out, I believe, next week. And yeah, this chap kind of set up an ayahuasca pyramid scheme in Europe with hastily trained recruits. And yeah, he's just kind of hoovering up the money. And yeah, I've spoken to several women that accuse him of bewitching them into having sex through a practice called love magic. And yeah, at the same time as his shamanic career, he's like producing these kind of very slickly made kind of shipibo cumbia music videos. We won't play this one, that would be a clusterfuck. But yeah, you see his kind of like, I don't want to laugh about it, but you see his kind of European followers sort of, behind him in the video, like fairly, emaciated and seeming lost. And yeah, it's just a really, really tragic story, actually. And women told me of sort of incomprehensible dreams that they had of him naked, charged with sexual energy, and then feeling an urge to have sex with him afterwards. And some did, although others were repulsed and fled. And some had, also had terrifying visions, and which led me to wonder, to what extent can facilitators manipulate the visions of the people that are in their, ayahuasca ceremonies? And here's a 2022 paper that says 15% of 11,000 respondents felt energetically attacked or a harmful connection with the spiritual world. That is quite high. I think, though, about 3% of those were, like, serious. So I'm left asking myself, like, why are people so often ill-equipped to deal with these sorts of gnarly visions and apparent encounters with entities? And yeah, it does seem, and this was, I'm sure Emily will touch on after, like, there's an outsized focus on love and light, or a belief that there's no such thing as a bad trip. And yeah, one has to ask, why that is. Is that just a kind of naivety? Is that sort of, for commercial reasons? And I can get a bit more into those reasons after. But this is an account from Albert Hofmann on the first LSD trip, and he had a tough time too. He felt like he'd been possessed and that a demon had invaded him. And in the seminal DMT studies in the 90s, Rick Strassman had to pause one of his studies because so many people were encountering negative energies. So yeah, I know it's a big debate, like whether the DMT aliens are real, but yeah, it's one that certainly needs to be had, I think. And so you do wonder, like, obviously set and setting really informs the quality of the psychedelic experience, but you have to ask if there are, other factors that we don't fully understand that are influencing, the direction of travel of the journey. And so back in the 70s, anthropologist Marlene Dobkin de Rios did field research in the Amazon, and yeah, she discovered that it's often used for nefarious purposes, leaving people with inexplicable symptoms. It says, shamans maintain that under the intoxication of ayahuasca, they can leave their bodies and inflict harm and even incurable disease upon their clients' enemies. And so, yeah, you've got traditionally these shamans, they're kind of eking out a living, right, in their communities, getting involved in feuds, like people who come to them, whether you believe it or not, to either remove curses or to curse someone, or indeed, to perform love magic. But it's a totally different relationship, with these things there. And in this book, In Darkness and Secrecy, they speak about how the erasure of shamanism's darker aspects is a vain self-deception. And yeah, as I say, it hasn't always been such an honorable profession, but suddenly, with the uptick of Western use, suddenly, these previously marginalized people are having, hundreds of thousands of dollars thrown at them. And yeah, they say that psychedelics have an ability to purge bad spirits. But yeah, all of this does leave me wondering, like, could they also let worse ones in? In the book, it also says, shamanism is inevitably concerned with dark shamanism, aggression, warfare, and a struggle for political and economic power. I mean, this stuff still kind of sounds slightly farcical to me, but, as I say, for all of this work that I've done, it's just impossible to ignore. As Eric Davis says, don't just hide the weird things in the footnotes, but that's exactly what's happening. Michael Harner, the shamanic expert who wrote the really seminal text on shamanism, he speaks about how it's a kind of high-wire battle of assault sorcery. I mean, it seems possible that rival shamans are able to infiltrate remotely their rivals' ceremonies and inflict harm on their participants. And obviously then it's down to the person holding the ceremony to, I guess, engage in that battle and win, I suppose. But it's still like, wow, is this really like what we're getting ourselves into here? And the Darkness book says, the ritual practices of curers are intimately linked to the assaults of shamanic killers and cannot be understood apart from them. And all of this is detailed in a new book by Alex Gearin, too. It's talking about, shamans needing to defend themselves from external sorcery attacks, and the social dimensions of Shipibo sorcery being a cosmos apart from the ego dissolution and becoming one with nature narratives that they guess tended to share about their ayahuasca experiences. And, there's a whole vernacular for all of this stuff, in the Shipibo language, and one wonders if it really is hocus pocus, why this vernacular has survived, possibly for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. And clips of this would be interesting as well, but I'll let you check them out another time. I mean, it seems like this chap has come as close to documenting the metaphysical as possible, like, and kind of sorcery. So yeah, I touched on this earlier, but why aren't we talking about bad shamans? I mean, as Peter Schodet, I hope they got that right, Hughes said here yesterday, materialism is our creed, right? And so we ignore the unseen, the mechanics of ethereal realms. I mean, it does sound a bit far out. And I think, there's a well-meaning drive to respect indigenous culture after centuries of violent colonialism, right? And often the missionaries' witch hunts did wrongly denounce and kill, in many cases, all shamans, kind of saying that they're all evil, although not necessarily the evil ones deserve to die either. But yeah, I mean, who is like 100% bad? Who is 100% good? And yeah, in 2025, nobody wants to be the guy that questions indigenous wisdom, although it seems that that's me now. I was looking forward to Emily preceding this. And yeah, it's understandable as well, like, the goal of legalization is a worthy one, and this unfortunate dilemma does really, muddy the water. In the 70s, these bad faith stories have made people really sensitive to critique as well, and I think that's understandable too. So I'll conclude now. Hopefully there's time for possibly one question, but yeah, I think it's important to address, access to psychedelics, it's clearly a good thing. Let's sail off into the sunset, and I think many people are, doing great work from the heart, but we just have to be a bit more discerning, I guess, and understand, these are portals to a spirit world that we struggle to understand as much as they're tools for healing. Thank you very much.